Do you see us live? All right. So can you pull the link for that live stream, and then since I'm using my phone, text it to Leslie. Do you have Leslie's number? No, 679-6625. Oh yeah, sorry, yeah. So yeah, that's right. Yeah, Odell, send it to Leslie, 679-6625, and then I'll have Leslie send it out to everybody else that wants to watch it. I'm sorry.
I'll tell you because he left. So it's 679-6625. Huh? No, because I wouldn't know what to do with it. Say it again? Yeah. Okay. Thanks. All right, bye.
Good morning, everybody. Come on in, everybody. It's great to have everybody together this morning for our special edition of Mitts and Fits, or as we like to call it, Mitts Fits. So first things first. One, there's two cars that are parked up against the side of the building. There's a white Dodge minivan, and then there's a Mazda 9 that's parked up against the building. If you could please move those, that would be really helpful. We're doing some work on the exterior of the building at the moment. The other thing is, if you've not had the chance to register, we've got a registration table right back here in the back. It's only $5 per person, just to cover the cost of the refreshments this morning. And then, if you are feeling additionally generous, we have some people that are taking care of the children in the back room, and we'd like to kind of give them a little something. So if you have a little bit extra that you'd like to donate for that, that'd be great as well. We've been doing the Mitts and Fits here in Hampton Roads for a few years now, and it's been a great opportunity for parents of young children to come and fellowship, get to know one another, to be encouraged, especially when it comes to parenting, We've tried to cover lots of different topics throughout the years, but we're really encouraged to have a great couple here with us this morning. Phil and Beth Bruns from Cincinnati, Ohio, are right here down on the front row. And they're going to be coming this morning talking about launching our families. Now, Phil and Beth are friends of Leslie and I for many years. We've known them since the mid to late 90s because we were in the Cincinnati church at one time. We were in the same region together. And Phil and Beth have always been a pivotal, key, instrumental couple in the church. They've done great things helping out with the church, in particular now most recently with helping families with young children, and they're also helping with young professionals as well. After this today, they're going to go to do our Singles Ignited to help with the young professionals there. They just came from Richmond last night. They're here in Hampton Roads today, and they're going to Charlottesville tomorrow. So they're kind of doing an around-the-world tour. But we are very blessed and encouraged to have you guys here with us. They've been Christians for over 35 years. Phil is in real estate. I remember at one time you were building Home Depots. I don't think you did that a long time ago. Anyway, so he's doing other real estate ventures nowadays, and Beth works for Procter & Gamble. She's been working there for many years, more than a chemical engineer, like a super research scientist, all the stuff. She does all that stuff. So, yeah. I don't know what she does. It's just really cool. They've got 4 incredible daughters. You can see them pictures up here on the slides. And again, we're just really encouraged to have you guys here with us today. Leslie has a few words she'd like to share, and then we're going to have a prayer, and we're going to have a quick icebreaker, and then get started.
We're so happy to have the Bryans. I have so many memories, which I won't get into them all. It's really funny. But I don't know if you remember, but I remember being in their living room when we played Survivor. I know you probably don't remember, but we were the first ones voted off. Remember that, stars. And then I remember before we had children, I remember going over there and seeing all the family vacation pictures going up the stairs. I remember coming in the kitchen and watching you teach one of the girls Christmas cookies, white shortcake. You dip them in chocolate. So if you go in my kitchen right now, I have Beth Bruns cookies in my recipe, and I make them every Christmas. I remember Carrie, which is on the end here this way, you sent her down to Trinidad and Tobago, and she came for to help with she came down for the first or the second. The second all-week teen ministry camp we had in Trinidad. And then we have something called bacon shark or doubles. Which one did you make? Bacon shark, which is actually fried shark, and then this special dough bread that everybody comes to get in Trinidad and Tobago. So I get this Facebook message from Beth, and she has a picture of her making bacon shark. So many cool memories of them. We are so grateful to have them and learn stuff from them, but you never know who's watching, moms. I was watching her. I was watching you guys and learned so much from them. So we're so grateful to have them.
Yeah. Well, let's go ahead and have a word of prayer. But Joanne Sega, you guys can come on up. Joanne Sega is going to lead us in our icebreaker here in just a few moments. But let's go ahead and pray, and we will get started. Father, you are a great and incredible God. You blessed us and placed us in families. Moms, dads, and children all spent to live life together and grow up and encourage and love one another. We thank you for this nuclear family that you've given us. We thank you for brothers and sisters who have been so successful in raising their families and charted a course and have led by example when it comes to spirituality. And we're grateful that we've got Phil and Beth here with us this morning. I pray that you would please speak through them. I pray that you would encourage all of us as parents as they teach us and give us some of their wisdom. I just pray that we would all walk out of here encouraged this morning and inspired to be the parents that you really want us to be. Thank you so much for this time, Lord, and we pray in Jesus' name.
everyone. So now's the time when we're going to break the ice. Now, oftentimes, icebreakers, first of all, the point of icebreakers is to loosen ourselves up, get our minds ready, get engaged, be alert, so we can give our total attention to the breath. Sometimes icebreakers take a little while to get going. So I want to encourage you, these icebreakers we're going to do, there's prizes involved. And sometimes you need a little extra reward to kind of get you going. So what we're going to do, I want to have everyone stand up. Everyone stand up. And what we'll do is we're going to ask particular questions to eliminate you guys from playing this game. And whoever's left standing gets a reward from our amazing assistant here, Doctor.
So the main thing with this is
Next one. So, I'll let my wife start off, and we're going to find out who spent the most money on the family vacation.
well, you can hit the arrow sometime.
Okay. So remain standing if you spend $500, at least $500 on family vacation. Okay. Remain standing if you spend $1,000 on a family vacation. Remain standing if you spend over $2,000 on a family vacation. Remain standing if you spend over $3,000 on a family vacation. Remain standing if you spend over $5,000 on a family vacation. Remain standing if you spend over $6,000 on a family vacation.
I want to be a part of your family. All right. Great job, great job. All right. Next chance, stand up. Everyone stand back up. Stand back up. You're all back in the game. There's Grace. There's Mercy. All right. Oh, man. All right, so remain standing. We're going to talk about your children having teeth knocked out due to accident. Wait. That's the question. All right. Keep standing if you knocked them all out. No. Wait. Remain standing if at least one, you had at least one child that lost a tooth due to an accident. All right. Remain standing if they cry. All right, easy. Good training. All right, how about two teeth? Wow. Same accident? Oh, no. Wow. Let's go with three teeth. All right, we got two more rounds. So, everybody stand back up. Stand back up. You did the exercise there too.
So remain standing if you have one kid that graduated from high school. Remain standing if you have two kids that graduated from high school. If you have
child that's broken the bone before? All right. How about if you've had two children that have broken the bone? Hey. Same accident? How about, we're talking about two kids. How about three kids? Nobody, right? Wow, three kids and broken bones. All right. Okay. This might be, we got one more gift, so. What I'll do, I'll just try to eliminate you randomly. Okay, we have a few questions we'll just ask from Billy. And sorry, this is just by chance, so don't do that. Keep standing if you are wearing red. Hey, I'm sorry. You're wearing red, keep standing. If you got red in the hat, brother. If you're wearing red, keep standing. All right. Okay, I'll be good. Yeah, you got it. I got you. You're right. Be different. All right. How about if you gave birth in a naval hospital? You got it. No. All right. We got you. One left. Since you both y'all, or three? Yeah, I got, okay. I'll take it. I got you. See, all right. How about if your birthday is between January and June? Keep standing. All right. How about if your birth date is between the 1st and the 15th? All right, that's all I got. Hope you had a great time.
And you've got men that get birth. How exciting is that? And I want to go on vacation with Matt. Wow. Well, we cannot express how excited we are to be here with you guys today. We, Tony and Leslie mentioned, we're great friends for a long time, and it's so funny, guys. It seems like it was like 2 years ago, but it's you know, as we know, when you have kids, time just seems to go faster and faster and faster as you get older. And so, yeah, when you talk about mid-90s, I'm like, that's just like 20 years ago. And so, yeah, I don't even know if we had all those kids when they were here, but they're in Cincinnati. But, yeah, we are super excited. You can show the next slide there of the things that we're working on. So our 4 kids, they are so special. I'm sure your kids are special to you as well. The oldest is 24. She's working in New Jersey, and the other 3 are still in the university yet. But they're all Christians and all doing well, and we a lot of times look at ourselves and say that it's kind of despite us. It's hard to parents. But we're happy to share today what we've learned and from our own experience, as well as talking to people just like you. We get with regularly in Cincinnati the young family group of families that are younger kids, and we're actually going to Lexington, Kentucky, to the church there a number of times this coming year, and so we created launchmini.com. You can see the website there, and we just wrote a book. It's mainly for professionals. We're excited about that. If all goes well with that, we just sell some copies and launch your family. And we do a little bit as well with launching teams. And it's all about transition. It's all about, having, when you're going from college into the professional world, as all of you know, that's a transition. Raising families, like a really long transition of that. And then also launching them into college. They're all transitional times. And so anyhow, so we have a website, we're on Facebook and Instagram. Feel free to follow us, throw out questions, keep in contact with us. We really, I think I mentioned it earlier, our goal is not to be one and done. We express everything that we feel like we've learned and lived our lives and been to lead. We want to have a relationship with all you folks that is hard, because as much as we want great families, the world works against that in a lot of ways. So our talk today is launch your family, and again, those are our personal emails there, so feel free to contact us. Let me move to the next slide. And then go on to the launching your family with meaning and intention. I think we get a lot of compliments on that. With Beth and I would talk a lot about our intentions and what we wanted to do with our children as they were growing up when they were little. And we get a lot of compliments on intentions and planning and action and following those intentions. Because it's about a long haul. You've got to, whether I don't know how it's kind of wide ranging of kids that you have here, but you're raising them to be adults. And as you know, we're adults a lot longer than we're kids and parents. And so you've got a window of time that sometimes I'm sure feels like a really long time, but I can assure you, when they get out there in college, you're looking back and you're thinking, man, you hope you did a good job with the few years that you have. Because they got the rest of their lives to be adults, and so you're giving them a foundation. Next slide. And the first point I want to talk about is this impressing upon your children. It's scripture in Deuteronomy 6. Go ahead to the next slide if you would. Deuteronomy 6. We're talking about impressing the Jewish rules at the time upon your children. And I'll tell you what we have found is we default to impressing them is this, teaching them about the Bible, teaching them to memorize scriptures, and talking to them what they've learned at Happy Church or the kids' team and whatever here. Some of those, that's part of it, but I'll tell you, the impressing upon your children we have found is much more about you as a parent and us as parents, about being the example, being the Christian. What do they see in your walk with God? What do they see in your humility? Sometimes that's easy, and then sometimes, especially when kids are younger, older kids, it can be pretty chaotic. And how are you in those chaotic moments? Sometimes when you're totally exhausted, you have to work overtime, you have to be out of town traveling, whatever it is. Life can get very, very challenging at times. And how are you in those times? How do you look as a Christian to your children during the more difficult times?
What I would say here is that our observations in the homes we dealt with is that they're overly consumed, not overly consumed, that's too strong a word, but they're focused more on, obedience the first time. That's like the go-to command scripture. So be obedient, be obedient or be disciplined. When you're overly focused on, it's all about Noah. It is about Noah, but Noah and being obedient without a heart that they see that you love God just kind of rings, facts or discipline or something. And so it is a balance. One of the first things that we said when we first started getting together with younger parents in Cincinnati, they asked questions about, we asked them what do you want to learn? What do you want to get to the first time? What do you want to get to better? And every one of them, like most of them, asked about discipline. And then we would say, well, what do you do? Well, John was sitting in the corner, 20 times a day, I think I do what I want, I'm 3 years old, and blah, blah, blah. And one of the things we said immediately was, if your life revolves around punitive discipline, you think that's what God treats you? And so we started having talks around, maybe it's you're upset with Johnny because this girl is milk at the table and that's just age appropriate. Maybe it's just your patience. And so the idea of engaging with your children, that they see God through your lifestyle. And you want them to experience God and the grace of God and what you signed up for as Christians. You can't just be producing these mindless, obedient children that are just sort of, doing what you want. And it takes a lot more energy to parent in the way I'm suggesting. Because they came back the next month and they're like, two things. Oh, it's working. My kids are better. And I'm more tired.
Awesome. And we're going to have some time for questions and answers later, so you can be thinking about that. But we go on to the next slide. So our big three things when you think about impressing, what you are. And first of all, it's God's love. You can just think about God's love for yourself. Think how you experience that. And ultimately, when it comes to Jesus and God has totally loved us, given us Jesus, given us a chance to have a relationship with Him. But it is love, and showing God's love to your children and explaining that to them and being the example. And it does it is hard sometimes when you're tired, when you're late, when it's late and you want to go to bed, and you kids are having a problem going to sleep, or whatever it might be. We get cranky, and I used to think I was a pretty patient person until I had children. I mean, really, you start to learn more about yourself more than any other time, and the pressure's on. You've got one shot to raise your children and be that example. God's power. When kids are, especially when they're younger, as they grow up in middle school and so forth, about just how wonderful God is in love, but also just His power and His strength. When they were younger, a simple thing I used to do was look at the birds in the backyard and wow, aren't they amazing? But then, gosh, look at all the different birds. There's so many different kinds of birds, or different kinds of trees, and none of these trees even match each other. And you start to help them with a vision of God's just not this big. God is like really, really wonderfully powerful. Look at the stars. And that's something that I think Satan is always looking. Satan always wants us to minimize God and not think about God and put Him in a little box right down here. But in fact, God is way, way bigger. So we can transfer that kid. But then also, God is authority. And this is sometimes a little bit challenging for us. Sometimes about maybe not having an authority. But teaching the children that authority is important. And we can respect and respond to God's authority. And we've got a number of scriptures that we've got. Please go back.
We did summer regular devotionals, and so there was always a master that back when we were in the line. But I would say something else that I look back on and I see it playing out now with my kids and their ages are now being adults, is that we did talk out loud a lot during the day or everyday moments with God. And so whether that was God's creation, both of our fathers have passed away in the last 24 years, and my dad died for 7 years. And so how you bring in the narrative on God and His heart. We got something not so great going on in school, and our teacher doesn't really understand the kid. Teaching the children to be surrendered in icky circumstances and to see the bigness of God in icky circumstances or family challenging circumstances. I would say that, devotionals are great, but if that's laced with the backstory of how you see love, power, and authority of God in your life, and you tell that to your children in your day-to-day walk, they'll get that concept. Because then when something hard happens, well, yeah, I trust God. Yeah? Our oldest daughter's very overwhelming kind of kid. Our second oldest is a very overwhelming kind of kid. She calls all the time crying, overwhelmed, crying, overwhelmed, crying, overwhelmed. It's been her whole life. She's 22 years old. We love her. She's going back for her last semester in school. She's going back her last semester in school. She said to us this week, I'm overwhelmed. But you know what she says? And she says, but God's got me. God's got me, and I've learned that being overwhelmed over and over and over again, and we tell her over and over again, God's got you, God's got you. I mean, it feels like you're just playing a tape in their head, but you're creating that tape in their head about God. So take opportunity for it.
Yeah, and just to reiterate,
Sorry.
that's got to be the tape in our head. Okay, the tape that's in your head, that's what's going to transfer to them. You can say this over here. Like I could tell you that yeah, I'm a Michigan fan. I grew up, about an hour away from the University of Michigan, and I usually watch one of their football games every year. But then, so you might think that I'm Michigan, but when I tell you that I actually went to school at Ohio State, and I actually grew up in Ohio, and actually the one game I watch of Michigan's when they're playing Ohio State, it gives a difference. So you can't be one thing and teach your kids another. So what we're talking about is being this yourself. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. Parenting a foundation of marriage, and boy, it's our marriages, and I know some of us are single parents. If you are married, boy, that is huge. When you think about this building, it's sitting on a foundation that holds your chair up. You haven't even thought about it, right? Because it's a strong enough foundation to sit here and hold us up. And it's the same thing with our marriage. If our marriage is rocky, if we're not together, it's going to create a little chaos. And so we wanted to talk about that. Let's move on to the next slide. Ecclesiastes chapter 4 is, the cord of three strands: you, your spouse, and God. And when we have children, we start to, it's when, like I said earlier, when you start to find out a little bit more about like who you really are. Are you really patient? Do you really love in the hard times? Those kinds of things. And I think we tend to, different things happen. And I'll talk about the guys, Beth will talk about the girls, but a lot of times, guys, and maybe you fall into this or not, you want to avoid what's going on. Like if the kid is crying or if they're having a hard time, a lot of times you just don't know what to do, and so you just want to kind of take a step back and just let them deal with it, or let the mother deal with it, and so we default to just neglecting. We default to the mother because she knows better, and so we kind of step back sometimes. The men tend to do that sometimes. Then we start to neglect our dating life, and I'm talking about our marriage, not with the kids, although you should do that as well. But I'm talking about our marriage. One of the things that Beth and I did that helped us immensely. So we both were working. Sometimes 60 to 80%, but the whole time while our kids were growing up, we both had day jobs that took us out of the house, and so our date times usually on a Saturday night. Sometimes it was just for dinner for an hour, but they were gold. They were gold to our marriage, and I always made sure that we had a baby. I think it was from God. Right across the street, a 12-year-old girl that came and watched our kids when they were really young. And but the things that we would discuss during those date times kept us together in our marriage. And they were just, I cannot implore enough, if you don't do that or struggle in that area, we did things like we organized, there was us and two other families that we organized a babysitting co-op that helped facilitate that as the kids were getting a little bit older. In fact, funny, it started with 6 kids, and you can see we have 4, but the babysitting co-op started with 6 kids. 3 families. It ended up at 3 families and 14 kids over time. At that point, we were done. But it worked out great. We would watch the kids one Saturday night of the month, and then you'd have the rest of the month to go on dates. The 2 families watch. Everybody did it once a month, and then you did something else with your 4th weekend. But that's how we worked that. I'll let Beth share.
Okay, so on the guys, on the girl end, I mean, on the girl end, you know, you have to create space for the dad, to be the dad. Okay, so if you're a woman here and you don't create the space, it's really hard for the guy to assert himself. And he can't come back up against all that estrogen and, you know, mother energy. You have to create the space for him. And so what that looks like, and we are a family of 4 girls. I mean, I am like, I love him, you know? I mean, especially when they get into like all that emotional stuff, you know, so there's times where like we would send one of us in, like so-and-so's jacked up, you go take a turn. You know, so-and-so's jacked up, you take a turn. Sometimes it was like, just get in line, your problems are not above the line right now. These other problems are. But we had a fairly open dialogue around the emotional state of the house, which I brought to him. Okay, he would say that I am perceiving. He would say I set the energy in the house, which I do. But if I didn't say to him, you know, this is where so-and-so is today, or this is where so-and-so is today, this is how we could have a good dinner, this is the issue we have to talk about. If I didn't create the space for him, he would not feel included and that he could lead. And so the number one thing I say to the women is, don't just orient yourselves to all your sweet young things in your house. That is a mistake. Orient yourself to your husband, create the space for you to tag team.
It is. There was more than one time where literally I'd come home and I would have 4 girls crying. And I'm like, oh my goodness, what do I even do? And really, I mean, there were times where I literally had to pause and think, I have no idea what I'm going to do with this.
And I would like triage it.
And so maybe you've experienced something like that yourself, but it is, yeah, if I can just reiterate back to the guys, guys, I really learned how patient I really was, and how much my love was actually conditional on them doing well, being happy. And when everybody's happy, it's easy to love, right? But people are having a hard time over something that I perceive as like, this is totally stupid. Like, what is wrong with you? It doesn't really matter what I think. And what I start to think is like, well, what does God look at me? I get problems with this person or this situation or whatever it might be. And God's like, that's stupid, Phil. What's wrong with you? And so it helps me with perspective that I know God really doesn't think that. He's very patient with me. So we can go on to the next slide. We talked about intention. And again, on our date times, we talked about this a lot. What did we want to do? What kind of experience? How did we want our kids to experience Christianity? And so we did a number of things. First of all, we always wanted to be Christians. In other words, we come to give. One of our favorite sayings that has held true longer than what we probably anticipated. One of our favorite sayings is, you want to be a friend, or want to have a friend at Happy Church or Kids Kingdom or at school. You want to have a friend? You go be a friend first. And our kids, we have said that over, and it's one of those tapes that we have played over and over and over in their heads. And I'll tell you, some of our kids have, when they've been in college, they've done a co-op experience where they do their school academic semester, then they go off to another city to work. And so our daughter, Carrie, she's been in Manhattan twice. She was just in Montgomery County this past fall. And she had, in 1 year, when she said it, I had to process it. She had 3 going away parties, and which is really hard. You're talking about a 21-year-old girl, and it is just hard to keep going back to the well. But when we were younger, when those kids were younger, we talked to them when they would go into their class. You want to have a friend? Then you go be a friend first. And so she knew when she went into Manhattan to be with the young professionals ministry there that she had to go and give. And it was unbelievable how they wrote her a card when she left there the last time. Everybody signed it and wrote something in there about how grateful. Because they were used to in Manhattan, a place like Manhattan in particular, people would come and either focus on their work or come to go on vacation. They didn't come to give. And we're really proud of her because she really came to give her heart and be in Bible studies and be in discipling times and get with people and that kind of thing. But that comes from when she was 3. Didn't all of a sudden just show up when she was 20. And so We did the teaching, Kids Kingdom, the teaching. We always taught in one of their classes. We had kind of a rotation as they were growing up. And so, and if we did some preparation for the class, they would help us do that. It was a part of a family experience. And so, and the third, you know, how you're building your personal ministry. We talk a lot about personal ministry, especially one of the other classes we do in. But a personal ministry, how they see you being the light to your neighbors, to your coworkers, to your friends, and so forth, has a big influence on how they view Christianity when they get into their teens and beyond. And do they see you growing spiritually? Again, it's the being the Christian. You're impressing upon them what a Christian is, what a disciple of Jesus is. And you know, so many times we talk to people with kids that are in their teens or into college and so forth, and so many of the problems that they're maybe challenged with goes back to when the kid was 2 years old and 3 years old, and how they were as parents.
And so, you know, in terms of who are you and what is your equity, when you're a family, you can't possibly, you know, when you're on campus, how many of you were converted in campus ministry? Okay. So when you're on campus, it's all kind of the same. You know, it's kind of cookie cutter. How many hours do you have to share your faith? How many Bible studies can you fit in? And that's fantastic. When you are fantastic. I have lived that dream. I love that dream when I was in it. I did love that dream when I was in it. But when you become a big fat grown-up, I can't possibly tell you that you, with your sweet young thing, I can't possibly tell you what's the best efficient way to make a difference for God. You know what I mean? You can't, it's not that simple. And so you as a family, you know, or you as a family, you have to choose, where do I want to make my mark in God's church? And how can I make that mark in God's church very visible to my children? Okay? And so we did that on purpose. If we're going to do children's ministry, they're going to help us teach the class. Not teach the class, but, you know, prep for the class. Okay? When we decided to lead the children's ministry, when our kids were in middle school and high school, and they were in charge of all the snacks. Okay, so every Sunday we're there an hour early, and you guys are in charge of the snacks, and God's people cannot function without the snacks if they're 7 years old. And you guys are bringing it. Okay, we always led a family group because we wanted to show our kids how to be hospitable. You know, the saddest moment for me last August, besides the fact that all of my children left Cincinnati last August, the same week. Okay? Yes, if you're moms, you can feel sorry. It was super hard. But the hardest pragmatic thing about it, not my crying part of it, but the hardest pragmatic thing about it, is we get with this group in our home in Cincinnati every other month. Guess who babysits for free, gladly and gleefully, and cheers us on as their heroes? Our children, who are young adults. I will miss my activity today because you need me to babysit in your house because you are the light. Okay? That's what you want your kids doing, and they know their energy helps our ministry, and our energy helps their ministry. You can pick whatever that flavor that looks like for you, but if you don't make a pick, it's hard to do impressing the stuff about God.
Yeah, and I was going to reiterate that yeah, leading a family group may not be your thing, you know, whatever that is, but if you want to have a date time with your spouse, that is a perfect topic to talk about. What can we do? And when you think about it, talk about it, plan it, and then follow through with it, that's when, you know, things can really happen in your family. So let's go on to the next slide. And yeah, I think, yeah, we've talked about a number of things. Why don't we have just, we've got some more. So why don't we take a quick couple questions or a couple comments from anyone? Leslie.
No, I think that is just so phenomenal how you're talking about being cohesive in your life and family. And I think, you know, I think we just have to talk about that more in our, you know, kingdom life, you know, is just how to be cohesive as opposed to how do I figure this out with my family, I gotta go here and they have to go there, but just really talking about and celebrating how do I do this as a single mom, as a family of teenagers, as a family of little kids.
Right.
because we're impressing upon them, you know, what it looks like to be a disciple. We're not in competition with
Right.
it. And
Right.
so
Right.
I just love that. I think we have to just really keep impressing that on one another and talking about that and rejoicing in
Right.
all the stages of our life.
Right.
We can glorify God
That's right.
in all the stages of our life.
That's right.
It's not meant to be that complicated. It's not easy, but it's not meant to be that.
That's right.
Right. And it's such a huge thing, you know, at some point, I know it was mostly younger kids here, but at some point, they're going to be of age and making a choice of, gosh, do I want to become a Christian? Do I think it's cool? Is this, you know, who is God really? And they're going to think back to you. Okay, there isn't going to be a teen minister or a campus minister that's going to have any bigger influence on your children and their relationship with God than you.
Yeah, that's true.
And so, yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, any other thoughts, comments, questions so far? Okay, we'll have some more time for questions down the road. So let's move on to the next slide. Parenting for the long haul. It is. You are building, like I said earlier, they're going to be adults a lot longer than they're going to be living with you. And we're experiencing that now as adults ourselves. Let's go on to the next slide. So building for the long haul is key. So we talk about teaching them to know themselves and who God made them. You know, it is, I cannot, God has worked in our lives. You know, Isaiah 64, Psalm 139, you know, David writes about how wonderfully, God, you made us and knit us together in our mother's womb. And that is so true. I mean, you think about what God has done, just our physical bodies is like totally amazing, but it doesn't stop there. In Isaiah 64, he talks about us being clay. Now God is molding and shaping us constantly in our lives. He prepares us and gives us experiences and gives us relationships that help develop who we are. But then we each have individual characters. That's kind of the miracle of it. Some of you might be a more introverted person. Somebody might be more extroverted. And you know what? Sometimes the extroverted person kind of gets more rewarded and stuff, but there's nothing wrong with being an introverted person. And so it's that kind of stuff that we're talking about. Our children and us in general tend to be more introverted. And so it's a reassuring, teaching them, reassuring that who they are, we're not talking about their sinful nature. We're talking about who they are, what kind of person, what they like, what they don't like, is okay. And so God made them, and they are wonderful with who they are. You know, it's helping them as they get older, as they grow up, being secure in who they are as a person. And knowing that, you know what, God made me, I am wonderful in God's eyes. It's going to help them in job interviews. It's going to help them in classes. It's going to help them work with other students. And we've run into that a lot, mainly because our kids tend to, like I said, tend to be more introverted. But that's okay, actually. And teaching them that is okay, and it's wonderful the way they are. And there's a place in this world for introverts just like they are extroverts. Yeah.
So one of the greatest compliments we get all the time when we're not the parents of so-and-so, so like we're the parents of Carrie or we're the parents of Elise, you know, we meet them in other places. One of the greatest compliments we get when people string together who are all of us, you know, is that the greatest compliment we get is your kids are so different. We have an engineer, we have a designer, we have a public relations person, and our youngest daughter is pursuing healthcare, also being in the healthcare field. That is all parenting. That's all parenting, that we help them with that tape in their head about who they are and how God made them. And so really, you know, date times with individual kids, space for every kid at your dinner table, not just the one loud one, you know, or that they're all loud, you know, fighting over the airtime, you know, create space for every kid and their voice is what we try hard to do as parents.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we help them, you kind of discover, it's hard sometimes to figure out what they like and dislike, but we help in conversations and dinner tables. Our dinner times were one of our key moments when our kids were younger. Because, like I said, we both worked, but it was, you know, family dinner time was like a sacred time for us. And so talking about, you know, how they like school, you know, what's going on and that kind of stuff. But I wanted to emphasize the last one we have here. We were in a seminar a long, long time ago where somebody talked about being 90% positive with our kids. And we hung on to that. And this is like going back 20 plus years. And it has helped us a lot. I want to say it here about being 90% positive with your kids. If not 95, err on the high side. Because it's easy to point out faults. It's easy to discipline, harshly or whatever. It's very hard to be affirmative, especially if your kid's in trouble all the time, or if they're not obeying you a lot, depending on their age. It's hard sometimes, but you be 90% positive, and we can move on to the next slide. And creating space for them to grow. One of the things we talk about, 1 Samuel 17 is when David meets Goliath. But the thing about that, so you know that David was a teenager at the time, is kind of one of those things of the story that you never really thought about. But his father Jesse sends him to this war. Okay, the Israelites are standing there in front of Goliath, right? And they're all lined up there. You probably know that story. It's like 15 miles or so from where he left from. So imagine you as a parent, like, oh, son, can you go up to the battle line and go talk to your brothers and see how they're doing? But that's exactly what happened. And so Jesse puts David in this, and I realize it was a kind of a different time and so forth, but sometimes with media and the world and the stuff we pay attention to in this world, we start to get very protective of our kids. And I think we need to have a good perspective on that. We mentioned about getting along with siblings and holding back and resting. Sometimes we have two children and they're bickering. And there's times where you need to go in and help them. But there's other times where you just need to let them go and let them work it out. Especially when they get old enough, like Johnny and Sally. You know what? You guys are 4 years old. You're big kids. There's one toy that you both want to play with. I think you can work it out. Go figure it out. And let me know how you guys work it out. Those negotiating skills turn into, in college, of how to work a roommate situation that's not working so well. And a coworker when they're in high school, or even in a working world when they're on a team working with somebody that's not carrying their weight. Those negotiating skills start when they're younger. And so, and the second one there is just helping them to be a friend. Helping them to be a friend versus others expecting to come into into their world. You see what I'm saying there? You help them. There's some, if they want to have friends, they're going to go into a classroom and they're going to have to go be a friend. I'll restate that. Into that world that's already there. If they're walking in expecting, like, oh, nobody came up to me, nobody said anything to me, that is something to work with your child on. Like, oh, I know it's hard, Sally. I know it's really hard. But you know what? Maybe next time, we can talk about it before we go into Happy Church and get a plan together that you can go talk with Mary or Susie, and you have a plan to help them facilitate that. But rescuing them and saying things like, oh, those kids are selfish and things of that nature doesn't really help your own kids. So I'll let them take them.
And when we go with school age or teenage parents, one of the big red flags for me is if I talk to them, it's usually mom. I talk to the mom, and she's called the teacher, the principal, the best friend's mother, and she's like orchestrating everything around her kid, instead of sending her kid to go solve their own problems. Okay, you can't do it. They cannot be capable in college or in high school if you don't send them. And if they get a bad teacher, you can teach them about God's authority and being humble. Amen. What you don't need to be doing is calling up the school. Okay? We never checked in with our teachers about grades. Because whose education is it? It's not my education. And do you want your kids? I mean, our worst nightmare is our kids flunk out of college and they want to move back home. I mean, nobody wants that. So that's where, holding back on some of that stuff
You know, where people can answer personal questions if you want questions. Because I have some convictions about that.
All right, we can go to the next slide.
All right.
All right, the character development. Boy, there's a lot there. There's all these topics. We could go on for a long time. You're trying to help your kids to be humble and humility, grow and change, accept correction and feedback. These are all critical things for like when you're an adult. And again, if you're at work and your boss or coworker or something is critiquing your work, it's important for you to be able to kind of take that and correct whatever you need to correct. Well, that kind of skill set starts when they're 2 and 3 years old. I mean, when they're younger. Giving them praise, being givers. You're teaching them about Christianity you're teaching them how God is, and not necessarily about God and from the Bible. You know what I'm saying? You're teaching who God is and these character traits. And you don't even have to look at Bible scriptures. It's actually who God is. That God is is a giver. He loves spirituality. One of the favorite things that's helped the most with our kids as they've grown up is the last one. I wish Peter would have emphasized that, people, you really do need to persevere. You do need to persevere. School is hard, academics are hard, life is hard, and you're going to need some grit. You're going to need some grit. And I say that of all these things are extremely important, but that's one of the ones I think we sometimes overlook a little bit. So I want to talk about that for a minute, because they're going to have bad things happen to them. As much as you'd like to protect them from it, bad things will happen to them. Hard things will happen to them as they're growing. They'll have a friend. Things that happened in our world was a neighbor that sat on the bus and said, "I won't be your friend unless you sit next to me on the bus." Okay, this neighbor kid totally manipulating stuff. A neighbor kid coming over to want to sell a pencil for $10 to one of our, to my 5-year-old. Those are things that happen, right? And so you have to help, coach them that that's actually not being a friend. Okay, teaching them who's friends and who's not friends. Our youngest daughter, for life, she had no good friends until she got to high school. It was very hard for her to judge who was a good friend and who was a not so good friend. It was just hard to figure out. So she a lot of times, had manipulating, rude stuff happen to her, and so it's helping him through those things. Helping them through hard situations with classmates and busmates and things of that nature. When they get older, I'm just going to tell you, and we've seen it in our kids in campus in particular, that a lot of the kids in campuses are struggling. I grew up in a church. That grew up in a church struggle with their faith in campus. I think in general, that's a cultural thing across America. But in our family of churches, they struggle sometimes when they get to campus because the campus isn't meeting my needs, or this person is not meeting my needs, or this situation is not meeting my needs. And it's all about who? Me, right? And so what we've seen happen sometimes, we've seen parents get involved with campus ministers. Okay, don't do that. Okay, we never called our campus ministers. Versus having your kids, your children, go figure out how to work through it, how to work through that. And if you don't develop that skill when they're younger, it's just that much harder when they're older. And we've seen a number of kids leave the faith, leave their Christianity, leave God, because they don't have grit. They cannot figure out how to work through that it's actually not about you. Okay? You think about stories, you think about like Joseph. Okay, the guy was thrown into a pit. He had a few bad things happen to him. Later he's thrown into jail for like years, right? Somebody lied about him. If he didn't have grit in believing that God was who he was and persevering in his faith in God, okay, the story of Joseph wouldn't be in the Bible. We wouldn't read it, right? We wouldn't know who he is. Okay, so having grit, we're being able to work through situations, and a lot of times they come up at school, But it even starts with those negotiating skills when they're 2 and 3 years old with their siblings, of trying to figure things out. But helping them to have the attitude that I'm going to figure this out, versus why doesn't somebody figure this out for me? Because it totally changes their life when they go forward.
My only point here is it does actually start today.
Yeah.
It's not next year when your kid is more mature and they have more skills and are less fragile. It starts today of thinking about grit, the things he's talking about, being givers, having grit, having perseverance. It is the way we parent. It doesn't appear later when they're 16 and all of a sudden you say, oh, now you're going to deny yourself, take up your cross and follow your Jesus. You know, if you don't teach that concept in your home today, it doesn't show up later. And how you right size it for the age we're talking about, you need advice. But we talk a lot of parents, and it's somehow in the future. It's not today. Today I have to call the campus minister. Today I have to call a teacher. Today I have to call that friend's mother because they're, well, John's being mean to my kid on the bus. Okay, it's not out there. It's right now.
Okay. I will kind of move along here. Gosh, we worked really hard. Oh, I'm sorry, move to the next slide. Sorry about that. Yeah. Fantastic. Yes, making memories. We spent a lot of time making the house a home, and I wanted to mention that. You have the physical building, right? But making it a home, a haven for the kids. When they start going to elementary school, and things happen. And it goes back to us, who we are, making the house a home and a haven. We always really held very tightly our home space as a haven for us. And our vacation, Leslie mentioned our vacation pictures on the wall. They're still there today, and that was by design. Okay, so the kids, every day when they walk past those, and of course they're out of the house now, but they would see those pictures. We'd never really talk about it, but they'd say, wow, what a great family. Look at all these things that we did. We did a lot of camping. We didn't spend a lot. We didn't spend $11,000 on our vacation. We had a pop-up camper. We did a lot of camping is what we did growing up. And let's move on to the next slide, please. Discipline considerations. A lot of times we think of discipline about this, of the spank, do I not spank? And I want to go back to being 90% positive. And a lot of times you can be preemptive. And Yorella Beth talked about this one.
On the preemptive thing, you have to set expectations before they get in trouble. So you know your kid's tendencies. So set it up ahead of time. It would be great if you had this behavior at church, and then you give them a big fat gold star later. Waiting to be reactive is not as great as being proactive.
Okay, we can go on to the next slide. Looking for occasions to parent. Again, that's just being proactive. What's that?
That's the next slide.
Yeah. Being proactive, and gosh, again, so much of the stuff we could talk so much more about it. But I'll highlight the first one, waiting versus instant gratification. One of the things that we were pretty good about growing up is, that food came at the meal times, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. They did get a snack here and there, but teaching them to wait for food when they're 2 or 3, things of that nature versus just a constant, free-for-all into the refrigerator whenever they want, which we've seen. We did not choose that, but that little thing when they're younger helps to teach them, you just don't always get what you want. And I'll tell you, with things like this, your kids will grow up with instant gratification. That was really a hard thing. For us, the smartphones, our kids are 5 years apart, almost exactly to the day. I bought them all smartphones at the same time. Our oldest was actually in her first year in college. Our youngest was in 8th grade, but they were using them in school. And I'm like, I had to do that. And so the kids are growing, your kids are more so even than our kids, are growing up in an age where instant gratification is going to be the norm because I can just go on here and I can go look for what I want. And so but the reality is as adults, is that that's not always true. I can't always just go buy this or go do this or go do that, right? It's not real life. And so little things, it can be food, it can be other things, and again, you want to talk about something in your date times, is this of how can we help our children learn that you don't always get instant gratification, because life is like that. God makes us wait all the time for things, right? And so that is an important thing. And oh gosh, there's so much you want to share. I think so much we could share, but go on to the next slide. I think that's a questions slide. Thanks for listening. Hopefully it's helpful. Questions, comments? Yeah.
Yeah, going back, my oldest son, he is very challenged when it comes to that grit and the perseverance. You know, and I have a hard time myself in my mind trying to be the example. I feel like, you know, okay, I work in the warehouse environment, which is a good example, doing a lot of labor and stuff, but he doesn't see that.
Yeah.
So how can I, you know, be that example of that grit and
How
perseverance?
old is your son?
He's 11 going on 12.
11. Does he watch like any sports or anything?
He doesn't like sports.
Doesn't like sports? Does he like music or any?
He's starting to get his music in.
Oh, okay, good. Our kids were all music. Yeah, I was a big sports guy. I converted over time to music, as you might imagine. but you know, I think talking. You know, when you're at dinner time, okay, you can talk about things like that, and you can go back to Bible stories. The reason I mention like sports stories, you know, it's because people get hurt and they have to work really, really hard. Like a pitcher or a football player or whatever, they work really, really hard to get back to being able to play again. But you can look at people in the Bible. I mentioned Joseph. That's like a great one. I mean, the guy was total grit. I mean, his family grew up in a pretty, you know, dysfunctional family, like all of us. You know, we had problems in his family. His brothers throw him in a pit. You know, he could have harbored that forever, but at the end of Genesis, he's telling his brothers, you know what, it's okay. I understand. I mean, I think it took his whole life to get his heart to this point, but he understood that God was working the whole time, and it was God, and I get it, and I don't have a problem. It's grit of understanding that God's at work. So, and there's lots of scriptures, lots of people that you can look at where it was hard, and Daniel's another one. The guy was taken from his home in Jerusalem, and then he was brainwashed into Babylon, essentially, and you know, but he hung on to his faith. The guy had grit, and there's all kinds of people. But go ahead.
So to build on that biblical narrative, you want a tape in his head that I have grit. And so anything that you can do, you ask him this day, did you have a challenge? Did you overcome? Then you say, you hang the moon because you have grit. What can you do tomorrow that's bold? When he comes home and he does 50% of it, you celebrate that he did 50% that he did, not the 50% that he did not. But if you look for proactive parenting opportunities where you can compliment him on his grit and then send it out into his day to do grit, and then you have the story back at home, if you work on that once a week, you know, for the next several months, that's your focus for your son, he will start telling that tape, you know, I had grit today, Dad, because I did such and such. But that's a good example of a proactive character thing you can get after by just creating the dialogue and putting some little, like rock climbing, you know, a little bit of stuff here, a little bit of stuff there, and you complement that with the Bible, and you're like Joseph. And all of a sudden he's like, I am.
Oh, yeah.
I got some swag. You know, we're the ultimate puppet masters. That's what you want in your kid's head. Just take advantage.
All right, good. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Our daughter, it's like whenever you tell her something, she always has to say something after. Like, no one will go do this. But I did this, can I do it tomorrow? It's not just being obedient and getting right to it.
Yeah.
And then I get frustrated. Like, you better listen. You better be obedient. Go do that.
You know, I had so much trouble with that with one of my children. I even taken to the woodshed as a mom more times than I would care to think about one of my children who pushed my buttons like that. And what finally, the last woodshed where I actually repented of it, was I was controlled by fear, which is in 1 Peter, like, don't be like Sarah, don't be controlled by fear. And I had to let go of my fear. And then 1 Corinthians 13, you're the bigger person, Beth. Stop that. You know, because when you yell at your kid, when you lose control, you know, all you're doing is you're setting up the occasion for you to apologize. When this daughter became a Christian, her counting the cost thing in our home, it was more about, because God's my witness, it was more about my sin. It really was. And we think she's a disciple in spite of us, but in particularly me, I think. And so I would really encourage you to get open and get real with some other moms. If you're that bad mom in your house, I know what that is, I've lived that, and there's just no way around. You go back to 1 Corinthians 13, you confess your sin. You have to be the bigger parent so that the discipline and the expectations and the authority becomes about her rising to the occasion and not you having to apologize for your sin.
Guys, I'd love to take more questions, but we should finish up.
We can take more.
Oh, we can? We're good?
So we're just gonna mix the groups. So
Oh.
we can go longer on the questions.
This is, okay,
So
fantastic.
10:45 for questions.
Oh, fantastic. We're looking for more questions then. Yes, over here.
So, you mentioned about having your child be that friend and seek after that friendship and be that example, I guess is what you're trying to say. But at the same time, like I have my daughter is 8 and she's got that one girl in her class being manipulative in her friendships. She tells us about how she's manipulating these other friends that are mutual and saying, oh, don't be I don't want you to be a friend anymore because you're hanging out with that person. So we're trying to teach her about that, about forgiveness and things like that. But how do you balance that out to the point where she's not, I guess, ostracizing that little girl? She's trying to be friendly and things like that. How do you I guess, ensure that she maintains her borders?
Yeah. And how old is she? I'm sorry?
She's 8.
8? Okay. You know, a lot of times, we as adults sometimes learn by the consequences, right? So a lot of times with our children, it's sometimes just talking to, okay, Sally, you observed her do this. Well, how do you feel about that? And kind of drawing them out and helping them see themselves like, oh yeah, that is not really not really cool. And sometimes just by, instead of us telling them, helping them to see that this person's not a good friend or not an example. It'll I think naturally kind of work out. She's not going to be hanging with this kid. I mean, it's going to be the natural consequence because the kid's not a good friend to anybody. Listen to what you're saying, and she'll find some other friends. Does that help? Hey, go ahead.
Oh, my other part of it was just I don't want her to essentially
like shun her.
Yeah, shut her out.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one of the things is that really helps is in the Spirit of God. Okay, we're all sinful. Okay, we're all sinful, and God loves everybody, and so you can use that. You don't have to be. One of the things that we talk about is being in the world but not of the world. Right? So we're all in the world. We all, have jobs or whatever we do. We interact with people of the world all the time. But that doesn't mean that we're going to go hang with them all the time. And so, but yeah, it's a good example of helping to understand God's love really does extend to everybody. But that doesn't mean you have to go hang with the person all the time. Is that? Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
When it comes to parenting together as Jewish parents, how can, a lot of times as parents, we have different styles of parenting, different rebuking. So how can you grow to be in the same mindset when it comes to disciplining your kids? Or what is acceptable and what is not acceptable?
Well, there's no doubt, people are raised different ways, and then you gotta come together as one and one of the worst things, and one of those things is if a kid knows mom's over here and dad's over here, and I sort of can play it off each other. Our best offense to that was honestly our date times. And, we did go out on dates every week. We had 4 kids, we both worked. We're both introverted. We hardly ever double dated. Now, we did get some, like, if you're a real Christian, you would double date and whatever, during some of those years. My church was a bit more legalistic back then. Probably not the way you roll now, but sort of was how it was landed on us. Fine. I'm all good. I'm a good disciple.
But what we took advantage of those daytimes, is a lot of times we would go through every single kid. This is what Elise needs this week. This is what Carrie needs this week. I see Rose is going off script on this issue or that issue, and then we would sort of align around the approach. But if we did not have those date times, not only would it would just be random. It'd be random discipline. I mean, you get life with little kids. I mean, you guys, I know you're not, I know what your lifestyle is. If you don't create the space to create some intention about it, because it starts with, do you have space to have the conversation together around how do we handle this character issue? And we would highly recommend a character issue of the moment. Your kids can have 20 things that you want to fix in them, pick one, like the grit comment. Because if you can start having success together and with the child on one thing, or it's the friend thing, pick the friend thing for this, and then we would pick one or two. We didn't have a laundry list. But that can really allow some focused conversation, so you have a tag team approach, because you're a unified wall of, goodness in your children's lives without, it being some mad, fly off the handle, out of control discipline kind of thing in the house.
Those date times, sometimes it was out for dinner, sometimes it was just a walk. It really varied. So, anyway, back in the back. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. First, let me say I appreciate a lot of you shared about the kids having great. I think that's great. One of the things the question that I have, is there ever a time as a parent that you did actually step in and sort of create a better situation, or are there situations where as parents we should step in and sort of stack the deck so that our kids can succeed?
Well, you want to?
Yeah. We actually did, two of those come to mind, okay? And they were in school. One of them was one of our children about maybe 6th or 7th grade, had a kid that, I don't know if he was assigned to her or if he just gravitated to her, but he would throw her stuff on the floor like every day. And I sent her in there for 3 weeks. You've got to be firm, you've got to stand up for yourself, talk to the teacher, and it never got sorted. And after about 3 or 4 weeks, I called the teacher and I said, this is just bullying, it's unacceptable, and I need you to do something about it. And it was done. But I did give her the opportunity, and then I complimented her for her courage throughout the way. We had 4 kids through 12 years of school. It's a lot of teachers. I called one time because the teacher was an elderly woman who was getting divorced. She was talking about her divorce and her personal circumstances. And it was my daughter who was in 2nd grade. And so I had to call the school, and I'm like, really? I don't know this, and I didn't make it about the teacher. I made it about my kid, okay? Because I don't want it to be that parent in a school system. I go, this is just a bad match. I'm very firm. I need another class. I'm like, oh, it'll be okay. We'll try. No, it's just a bad match. It's nothing personal. It's just a really, really bad match. And I was firm. We went face to face. She was moved to the next class, and she did fine. But you really want to use those cards under dire circumstances, and if you absolutely cannot get your kid to rise the occasion and solve that themselves.
Yeah. Go ahead.
So I have an 8-year-old introvert, and I was extremely morbidly shy, and was one of the things that I had to work on when I studied the Bible as a teen. And so it wasn't something that was worked on personally at home, and I don't know how to approach it with my daughter, because she's at the point where she's aware of it, she doesn't like it about herself. I'm like super affirmative, you're awesome, you're this, and we talk about all the things that she's so great at and God made her to be, and she wants to change this, but then when it comes time to these social moments, I think there's anxiety. She runs away, she gets scared, and we talk about it.
Yes.
Okay, this is what you said you wanted to do, you wanted to say hi to this person, and so we haven't had a victory a whole lot, and I don't know how to help her have a victory, except for treats, and that's the only thing that's
That's bad. Don't do that. We haven't done that. Don't do that. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Oh, no. Okay, so first of all, if you're, my heart is with you. I am that kid. Okay, a couple of my kids are that kid. Okay, there's an excellent TED Talk, Susan Cain, and it's called Quiet. If you have an introverted kid, I highly recommend. She has a book. It's an excellent book as well, but it's a TED Talk. Just do TED Talk, Susan Cain, Quiet, you look at it. It's how God made her. She doesn't have to fix herself. Okay, so you need to internalize that first. Secondly, what we do with our introverted children is that they typically excel in the one-on-one. It's the one-on-one. My daughters that are introverted, you want them to be your kid's friend. And so you send her out there and you say, Jenny, you know, you're gifted at the one-on-one. You have this one great friend, don't you? Does she have a good friend? Okay. You have this one great friend. When you go into church today, can you pick out the kid in the corner and be that kid's friend? Okay? You help her excel in the one-on-one. Same thing at lunch. You're having anxiety about lunch. Can you pick out that kid today to go to lunch tomorrow? And then you find that kid and then you celebrate that. But their world is going to be empathy. Their world is going to be, you know, one-on-one. It's not going to be, you know, this is a lifetime of skills for me to stand in front of you and, you know, be myself. You know, but that's not who I am at all. God's grown in that skill with me, but I would still prefer to be in a book by talking to myself, mostly, or him. You know, that's like myself, God, or him, and I could go to heaven right now. I mean, any social stuff. But find a way to compliment her victories and don't try to fix her, because then she'll grow up feeling broken.
Yeah, we had, well, we'll go on to another, one last question, yeah. Go ahead. Yep.
I'm a single mom. I have a 5-year-old, and when I'm listening to this, I've had the hardest time with him because at home he is one child, and those that are closest to me, they see that child. Like, he is amazing. He's happy. He's so funny. He dances. He sings. As soon as we leave the house, we go anywhere, and it's like he has this wall up. He doesn't smile. He doesn't want to say hi to anyone, and those that he loves and has let in, by all means, he's like, there's my Miss Dana, or there's my blah blah blah, and he is so warm. He's welcoming. But outside of those like people,
Yeah.
and I can't quite reason it. He's not like my other two who are social, and I'm an introvert, and he's an introvert, and he's not. I don't know what he is, and I don't know how to parent him.
How many kids do you have?
I have 3.
Okay, yeah. Well, one of the challenges is if you have 3 kids, they're actually 3 different people. 3 different characters, 3 different whatevers, and yeah, sometimes some are more challenging than others. I want to go back to be patient and love, and he's a wonderful kid, I'm sure. You know, we mentioned our kids were all introverts, and so at home we'd have a blast. But very similar to you, we go into crowds, and sometimes even at church. In fact, a lot of times, honestly, we got discipled more than once of our kid wasn't giving in happy church, but we took that with a grain of salt all the time, and we kept going back to the well, helping them to give strategies. You're wonderful. Here's a strategy. You're wonderful. It's going to go back. You just keep telling them, because you know what? Satan is out there telling them the opposite.
Yeah.
Okay, he's out to steal, kill, and destroy your kid and our kids. Okay, and so it's a constant love and patience and hanging in there with them, giving strategies of, okay, how can we, you know, we're going to somebody's house. How can we, you know, be friendly? What do you think would be helpful in this situation? And they may not know. And well, how about if we just go give a hug to the other person, whatever it might be. I don't know I can do it. Well, just maybe one little hug. I'm not sure. And then comes up, Johnny, you did great. It was awesome. And it's just a constant reassuring that they're awesome with who they are.
And how old is he, did you say?
He's 5.
He's 5. Okay, well, the wall is scary.
Yeah.
And so the other thing I would do is I would start observing because it sounds like he turns in from, you know, boy number 1 to boy number 2. It sounds like you recognize that. Okay. When you recognize it, then some point later, when there's no social pressure, say, you know what, Stevie, Johnny, you know what, I noticed that at this moment, you turned into this boy. What was going on in your head? And you got to ask that in a safe space, at home, you know, over the hot chocolate, you know, whatever is the place that you can whisper that stuff out of him, because there's a script in his head, and you want to figure out what the tape is so that you can insert the cheerleading, the victory, and overcoming, so he can be one whole person and not this two things, but there's something in his head that causes it to click over even at 5. Your job is to detect it out of him and whisper it out of him.
Guys, thanks so much. It has been a blast. I hope you feel free to back
Wow, that was fantastic. Thank you so much, Phil and Beth. What a spiritual, encouraging, yet responsibility-taking kind of a style that you guys have with your kids. Not being the helicopter parents, not rescuing them, allowing them to face the hardships within reason that they need to face so that they can become the children that God wants them to be. And then the whole recognizing who they are. You said many of them, if not all of them, are introverts. And no, I just think that's just so important. That's so key. I took so many different lessons from what you guys talked about today. The TED Talk video that you talked about, I watched that video and I cried.
The quiet one?
Quiet, because I realized for the first time, it's okay to be introverted. Like, that's how God made me. And this was like a year ago that I did this. I'm just coming to that realization. But anyway, I mean, just recognizing that in your children and affirming that in your children is it's just so important. We've got so much to learn. Yes. Why don't we pray on that? I think we might have some refreshments left, whatever's left. You're free to fellowship and hang out and continue to talk. Let's pray. God, again, wow, just thank you so much, God, for people that have been experienced, people that have gone through so many different situations that can share their knowledge and their wisdom with us when it comes to raising children. We know that, Lord, these are primarily and firstly your children before they're our children, but you do use us as parents, as tools and instruments in their lives to help them to be the children that you desire for them to be. Thank you that we've got this opportunity, we have this chance to love our children in this way. Help us to grow in our own patience, our own humility, our own levels of sacrifice when it comes to our children as well. So ultimately that we can glorify you. Thank you so much for Phil and Beth being here as well. We pray that they would have safe travels back up to Charlottesville and to Cincinnati once again, and that you would continue to bless their family. We pray in Jesus' name, amen. 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 We're all dismissed for fellowship. Thanks.
To you, your wife.
I'll take it.
Good. Very good.
Yes.
Man, got a lot of questions to ask him.